Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we're going to begin a new mini-series on the channel, as we rank the Traitor Legion gene lines most needed by the current Imperium. Now there's no real need for a spoiler warning today, but just keep in mind we will be referencing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe. But as always, with that out the way, let's waste no time and just jump straight in. Now, since the revelation of Belisarius Caul's request to use Traitor gene seed in the Primaris, it's been a largely accepted theory that he has surely already experimented and done it. Indeed, the emergence of the suspiciously named Sons of Phoenix chapter, so-called Imperial Fist Successors, was pretty much seen as confirmation of that by most of the fanbase. And the various Traitor gene lines are issues we have discussed before, and it's something that's been playing on my mind again recently, with the now confirmation of Caul's use of Traitor gene seed within Alpha Primus. And in knowing that now, that he most definitely has, I really wanted to reassess the notion of Traitor Legion successor chapters, thinking which lines would be the most needed for this current Imperium, ranking them from least to most needed, because the galaxy has changed drastically in a very short space of time. The specific objectives the Imperium faces right now, I see as threefold. The continued defense of Imperium Sanctus, stopping the Tyranids on the west of the galaxy, and free Guilliman's invasion of Imperium Nihilus. So, things have certainly changed drastically since we last had a discussion regarding the Traitor lines, and we have a varied assortment of different challenges facing the Imperium. As always, this is just my opinion. There are no right or wrong answers, so drop your own rankings in the comments below. Coming in at number 9, the least needed gene line by the current Imperium, in my opinion, the World Eaters. I always hate kicking off a ranking series or debate, because someone has to come at the bottom. It's always harder deciding this than the top. The truth is the Imperium could use all of the Traitor lines within successor chapters. As Belisarius stated to Guilliman, the Emperor intended them all to work in concert with each other. Anything less is the Astartes not working at their full capacity, as they were intended. And so in looking at the line of Traitor Legion successor chapters, I've really had to think and drill down to the specific traits that they would bring, the uniqueness that sets them apart. The Loyalist World Eater legacy is probably one of the harder to see and remember, as the influence of Angron and the implementation of the Butcher's Nails is so defining, casting his sons into the eternal image of rage-fueled madmen. But obviously, that was never quite intended to be their fate, quite so extreme. However, the original World Eater Legion was savage in battle to say the least. Rumoured during their creation that only the most aggressive of candidates were successfully selected. After their first few battles, the Emperor held them in reserve, for unknown reasons. It's speculated that this could have been a bloody counter to any who dared rebel, but it's equally possible it could have been because he didn't want to unleash their bloodshed and savagery on the Sol system. The Cerberus Rebellion is perhaps the best example of just what true loyalist World Eaters were. With the Cerberus colony's uprising, the Warhounds Legion, as the World Eaters were still named then, were sent in to quell the rebellion. To be precise, bring the Emperor's wrath to those who defied him. Which they did. Within 5 hours the colony was defeated, and not a single prisoner was taken. The Warhounds had taken tremendous casualties, but they had slaughtered them all. The key difference here between the original Warhounds and the World Eaters they would go on to be, well, they weren't ordered to take prisoners. The World Eaters, to a large extent, became unable to control their savagery. It overrid their tactical acumen, their orders. Even if the World Eaters were ordered to take prisoners, they wouldn't. They would still slaughter them all. Though the Warhounds were very straightforward, specific in purpose, savage, they could still listen to orders, still be tactically aware when they chose to be. Let's not get it wrong here, they were still the most excessive and aggressive of the legions, but they were not quite what they would go on to become. As long as they were supervised, they still had their role to play. As a legion force, the Warhounds were a death sentence, an annihilation, and so a lot of the time their forces were dispersed amongst the other fleets, to act as the beachhead assault, or a shock troop reinforcement, a devastating counterpunch to the enemy. Now it's undoubted this kind of unbridled force in a line of chapters could be extremely useful within the current Imperium. With war truly everywhere, more than ever before, having chapters that immediately just smashed into the enemy and decimated them through sheer force would bring a counterpunch the Imperium lacks in many ways. Yes, they have the successors of the Blood Angels and Space Wolves out there, but their rage and savagery is far more calculated and contained to the battlefield. The Blood Angels' existence revolves around resisting their rage, for example. For the World Eaters, or the Warhounds, the earliest records show it bled far more into their way of thinking. It's just my opinion, but I'd definitely be giving the Sons of Sanguinius and Russ the tactical advantage, or flexibility, let's say. And I think that's pretty important in this current galaxy. It's kind of ironic really, that in an Imperium where they gladly destroy an entire planet to keep a secret, you would expect a line of Angron to fit in perfectly. But I do think there's an important difference, in that the Imperium likes to keep its secrets. Word of a world butchered, slaughtered at the hands of a chapter, isn't the kind of thing the Imperium wants to spread. That always attracts the attention of the Inquisition sometime down the line. Sure, against the Xenos, the Imperium would have no problem, even a world fallen to chaos. But in the current Imperium, you don't have the luxury of choosing your foe, and chapters descended from Angron would be landing on worlds and massacring entire populations for the smallest rebellion by a governor, killing Militarum allies for one infraction or another, which was reported prior to Angron within the Crusade. Yes, the original Warhounds Legion would take prisoners if ordered to, but the current time chapters are their own bosses. They don't have such supervision. There wouldn't be those specific orders coming in. They would find the enemy, and they would massacre them. Again, against the Xenos, that's no problem, but in many situations, it would be. Now, how would those atrocities be any different than the actions of the Sons of Curse, you might ask? And, well, again, I think there's a small important detail here. The actions and tactics of the Night Lords, using terror to ensure loyalty, was generally confined to a settlement, a city, something that would scare a governor, a ruling class, a populace into compliance. However, the acts of the World Eaters, the acts of the would-be Sons of Angron, they wouldn't be leaving populations behind. They're the kind of things that transcends worlds, spreads across systems. The butchers of so-and-so battle, or world. their campaigns would become infamous. Were it entirely confined to the enemy, again, no problem. And I'm certainly not saying either would be acceptable to Guilliman's line of thinking. He didn't even like Alfarius's way of war. But when you hit those grey areas, worlds that were largely loyal, but maybe had a dubious or foolish governor, and those entire populations end up slain, or loyal militarum allies decimated, that then becomes a problem. And those rumours and word spreads like wildfire. For all that savage advantage, that's an issue none of the other traitor lines would bring, in my opinion. However, for all of that, even then it's not really a deal breaker. It's not like the Sons of Sanguinius haven't had their issues and caused a stir over the centuries. Yes, it would be a bigger problem with Successors of Angron, but not something unheard of. And maybe that savagery against the enemy would be so advantageous, the Imperium might overlook the occasional scandal. So, the biggest reason I have the World Eaters as the least needed traitor gene line by the Imperium is actually pretty simple. Their very high rates of casualties. The Astartes chapters have been stuck in an eternal war since the end of the heresy. For 10,000 years they have struggled to retain the full mainstay of 1,000 marines. There's not a single chapter across the galaxy that has found that task easy. Some bloodlines, such as Sanguinius for example, struggle far more. And now the galaxy is aflame, the struggle far worse. Even with the introduction of the Primaris, you still need recruits to become them. The success and savagery of the Warhounds' assaults was directly reflected in the high rate of casualties they sustained. Frontal close quarters assaults on enemy positions, it's a no-brainer. It will come at a cost. A high cost. This may have been manageable in the days of the legions, and even then it would catch up with them eventually. But for a chapter, well, it's a recipe for disaster. In this current climate of the galaxy, with enemies assailing the Imperium from every single side, every single marine is a precious commodity for a chapter. Even after the Ultima founding, we have just seen Guilliman beseech call for more marines, to make more Primaris, the concern he has for reinforcing Nihilus. As great as Warhound World Eater Successors would be for storming Chaos strongholds, the losses would simply be something Guilliman couldn't handle, or tolerate. And I'm not sure the war in the west against the Tyranids would favour the Warhound tactics either. The attrition rate against the Tyranids would be almost suicidal. So, for all the devastating potential those Successor chapters could bring, I just don't see how they could excel within this current Imperium. Perhaps their one biggest flaw is the one thing the Imperium doesn't need right now. We have to be fair and say not all Successors exhibit their Legion history the same, but by and large a Successor chapter does generally retain those founding characteristics. And though I'm not classing any of their founding legions fall against them, you do have to admit of any of the traitor lineages, arguably, you may worry about the Warhounds, the World Eater Successors, the most. The Blood God has proven to be pretty ascendant in the galaxy right now. So for me, despite the savagery they would bring, despite their prominence and superiority in a war of annihilation, that extremely high casualty rate, as well as the specific toolset, means I'm ranking the World Eaters as the least needed gene line by the current Imperium. At the end of the day, while the World Eater method of war could enact and take vast losses on the Tyranids, I just think that's a recipe for disaster, as their own casualties would be catastrophic. Their method of war doesn't particularly ensure the stability of Imperium Sanctus either. And again, as we said, Guilliman's supplies and numbers are already a concern for the campaign within Nihilus. He couldn't afford the losses the World Eater Warhound successors would bring. So at the end of the day, I just can't place them any higher. If Guilliman wanted to annihilate the galaxy and start over, well then the World Eaters would be the way to go. But right now, not so much. But as always everyone, what do you think? In your opinion, where would you rank successor chapters of the World Eaters line? Like me, do you see their function as a bit more specific than some other lines, and one that's maybe not the most needed by the current Imperium? Do you see that high casualty rates as a deal breaker? Or do you see certain scenarios where a chapter could be founded for a specific purpose, given an objective where perhaps they aren't expected to survive after, where the World Eater's War of Annihilation would be most appropriate? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.